Chaiva, Vidhi Anadi Ubhav Api, Vikramscha Gunamschaiva, Vidhi Prakriti Sambhavam. Translate. Material nature and the living entities should be understood to be beginningless. Their transformations and the modes of matter are products of material nature. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. By the knowledge given in this chapter, one can understand the body, which is the field of activities, and the knowers of the body, both the individual soul and the supersoul. The body is the field of activity and is composed of material nature. The individual soul that is embodied and enjoyed and enjoying the activities of the body is the Purusha, or the living entity. He is one knower, and the other is the supersoul. Of course, it is to be understood that both the supersoul and the individual entity are different manifestations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The living entity is in the category of his energy, and the supersoul is in the category of his personal expansion. Both material nature and the living entity are eternal. That is to say that they existed before the creation. The material manifestation is from the energy of the Supreme Lord, and so also are the living entities. But the living entities are of the superior energy. Both the living entities and the material nature existed before this cosmos was manifested. Material nature was absorbed in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Mahavishnu, and when it was required, it was manifested by the agency of Mahatattva. Similarly, the living entities are also in him, and because him meaning Krishna, because they are conditioned, they are averse to serving the Supreme Lord. Thus, they are not allowed to enter into the spiritual sky, but the coming forth of material nature. But with the coming forth of material nature, these living entities are again given a chance to act in the material world and prepare themselves to enter into the spiritual world. That is the mystery of this material creation. Of course. Why does it say that is the mystery? Because it's full of mercy. That's why. Uh, Otherwise, they would be annihilated. But no, no one is annihilated. Everyone has a chance to make spiritual advancement. And if they don't act properly, they're not destroyed. They still have a chance to make progress. Material nature was absorbed in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Mahavishnu, and when it was required, it was manifested by the agency of Mahatattva. Mahatattva is the total material energy. Similarly, the living entities are also in him, and because they are conditioned, they are averse to serving the Supreme Lord. Thus, they are not allowed to enter into the spiritual sky. But with the coming forth of material nature, these living entities are again given a chance to act in the material world and prepare themselves to enter into the spiritual world. That is the mystery of this material creation. Why does it say it's a mystery? Because that's the mercy of the Lord, that He will give the living entity many, many chances to be elevated to the spiritual world. Actually, the living entity is originally the spiritual part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, but due to his rebellious nature, he is conditioned within material nature. It really does not matter how these living entities or superior entities of the Supreme Lord have come in contact with material nature. The Supreme Personality of Godhead knows, however, how and why this actually took place. In the scriptures, the Lord says that those attracted by this material nature are undergoing a hard struggle for existence. Well, that's true. But we should know it with certainty from the descriptions of these few verses that all transformations and influences of the material nature by the three modes are also productions of material nature. All transformations and variety in respect to living entities are due to the body. As far as spirit is concerned, living entities are all the same. What does that mean? It means the living entities are all eternal. But their bodies go through many different changes. So it's possible that one can stay almost eternally in the material world by refusing to become Krishna conscious. But if one tries to become Krishna conscious, then Krishna will do everything to help that devotee so that this will be his last lifetime in the material world and he can go back to the spiritual world. Okay, so text 21. Karya karana kartritve hetu prakritir uchyate purusha sukha bhoktritve hetu uchyate. Nature is said to be the cause of all material causes and effects, whereas the living entity is the cause of the various sufferings and enjoyments in this material world. Yeah, we can either ruin our life by taking up sinful activities, or we can liberate our life from all suffering by becoming Krishna conscious. The different manifestations of body and senses among the living entities are due to material nature. There are 8,400,000 different species of life, and these varieties are creations of the material nature. They arise from the different sensual pleasures of the living entity, who thus desires to live in the body or that. Who desires to live in this body or that body. When he is put into different bodies, he enjoys different kinds of happiness and distress. His material happiness and distress are due to his body and not to himself as he is. In his original state, there is no doubt of enjoyment. In other words, he's full of happiness in his original state. Therefore, that is the real state. Because of the desire to lord it over material nature, he is in the material world. In the spiritual world, there's no such thing. The spiritual world is pure. But in the material world, everyone is struggling hard to acquire different kinds of pleasures for the body. It might be more clear to state that this body is the effect of the senses. The senses are instruments for gratifying desire. Now, the sum total, body and instrument senses, are offered by material nature as well, as will be clear in the next verse. The living entity is blessed or damned with circumstances according to his past desire and activity. According to one's desires and activities, material nature places one in various residential quarters. The, the being himself is the cause of his attaining such residential quarters and his attendant enjoyment or suffering. Once placed in some particular kind of body, he comes under the control of nature because the body, being material, acts according to the laws of nature. At that time, the living entity has no power to change that law. Suppose an entity is put into the body of a dog. As soon as he is put into the body of a dog, he must act like a dog. He cannot act otherwise. And if the living entity is put into the body of a hog, then he is forced to eat stool and act like a hog. Similarly, if the living entity is put into the body of a demigod, he must act according to his body. This is the law of nature. But in all circumstances, the supersoul is with the individual soul. That is explained in the Vedas, Mundaka Upanishad 3.1.1, as follows. Dvas Suparna Sayuja Sakayaha. The Supreme Lord is so kind upon the living entity that he always accompanies the individual soul and in all circumstances is present as the super soul or Paramatma. In other words, Krishna is in the body of every living entity. And he's simply waiting to see that the devotee turns to him. But most or many people never turn to Krishna, although he is in their body. He's the closest person to them. But due to their being enamored by material nature and sense gratification, they purposely avoid understanding their relationship with Krishna, even though Krishna is in their body. He's the closest person to them. But they ignore that due to attachment to sense gratification. That's how dangerous sense gratification is. But anytime when the devotee gets sick and tired of repeated birth, deaths, old age, and disease, and wants to free himself from that vicious cycle, Krishna will do everything to help him so that this will be his last lifetime in the material world. Okay, so the Supreme Lord is so kind upon the living entity that he always accompanies the individual soul and in all circumstances is present as the super soul or Paramatma. So that means at any moment, even if we're the worst sinner, if we turn to Krishna and pray for his mercy, immediately Krishna will accept and help us and protect us because he's in our body. He is the super soul. And he is just waiting for us to come to our senses and give up sense gratification and take up devotional service. It's as simple as that. It's not complicated. But people make things very complicated because of not having faith in Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And it's a tragedy. But unfortunately, the majority of people avoid Krishna consciousness and go along suffering birth, death, disease, and misery unnecessarily. Text number 22. Purusha prakriti sto hi bhukte prakriti jan gunam Karanam Gunasangasya Sadasad Yoni Janmasu. This, of course, is beautiful Sanskrit uh, Sanskrit poetry, and at the same time, very profound meanings. And this verse is translated the following way by Srila Prabhupada. The living entity in the material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. This is due to his association with that material nature. Thus he meets with good and evil among various species. Yeah, so the modes of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, control the activities and desires of the living entity, who is under the spell of sense gratification. So one can engage in sense gratification in goodness, passion, or ignorance, or mixtures of goodness, passion, and ignorance. But when they transform their understanding of Krishna and become transcendental to goodness, passion, and ignorance, and they come to the state of Sudasattva, transcendental goodness, they're no longer subject to being in the misery of the material world. Even the mode of goodness, mundane goodness in the material world, is full of misery. Of course, not as much as someone who is in the mode of passion or someone who is in the mode of ignorance, but still, even in the mode of goodness, one may also have suffering. Why? Because one is still enamored by things in the material world, not as severely as people in the mode of passion or ignorance, but still they have attachments in the material world. It's only when one is elevated to Sudasattva, transcendental goodness, that they begin to taste the transcendental life of spiritual activity, and they're no longer subject to the miseries in the material world. And if they maintain their position transcendental to the mundane of qualities of mundane goodness, passion, and ignorance, they will eventually be liberated and go back to the spiritual world. Okay, so it says, the living entity in material nature thus follows the ways of life, enjoying the three modes of nature. This is due to his association with that material nature. Thus he meets with good and evil among various species. Okay. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. This verse is very important for an understanding of how the living entities transmigrate from one body to another. So we should pay a lot of attention to this. Prabhupada is saying that this verse is very important for understanding of how the living entity and living entities transmigrate from one body to another. It is explained in the second chapter that the living entity is transmigrating from one body to another, just as one changes dress. This change of dress is due to his attachment to material existence. As long as he is captivated by the false manifestation, he has to continue transmigrating from one body to another. Due to his desire to lord it over material nature, he is put into such undesirable circumstances. Under the influence of material desire, the living entity is born sometimes as a demigod, sometimes as a man, sometimes as a beast, as a bird, as a worm, as an aquatic, as a saintly man, or as a bug. I like the way Prabhupada writes. This is going on. And in all cases, the living entity thinks himself to be the master of his circumstances, yet he is under the influence of material nature. So, what does that mean to be under the influence of material nature? That means that one is a prisoner of sense gratification and has to remain in the material world, always suffering the modes of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance. How he is put into such different bodies is explained here. It is due to association with the different modes of nature. One has to rise, therefore, above the three material modes and become situated in the transcendental position. That is called Krishna consciousness. Unless one is situated in Krishna consciousness, his material consciousness will oblige him to transfer from one body to another because he has material desires since time immemorial. But he has to change that conception. That change can be effected only by hearing from authoritative sources. The best example is here. Arjuna is hearing the science of God from Krishna. And the living entity, if he submits to this hearing process, will lose his long cherished desire to dominate material nature. And gradually and proportionately, as he reduces his long desire to dominate, he comes to enjoy spiritual happiness. In a Vedic mantra, it is said that as he becomes learned in association with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he, the living entity, proportionately uh, relishes his eternal blissful life. What a wonderful purport that is. Amazing. Are there any questions? Anybody have a question for what we just read? Any questions? This is one of those monumental purports, Srila Prabhupada, that is explaining the real situation of our position in life. Any questions or comments?
Hare Krishna, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
I would like to ask you, if someone asks me, what does Vedic mean? What can I say?
Well, there are these books called the Vedas, and those Vedas are explaining the traditional culture of uh, the position of liberated souls in the material world. And it teaches how to gradually be elevated from lower states of consciousness to the highest state of consciousness. Veda literally means knowledge. So, if you become a person who follows the Vedas, you will gradually be elevated to the highest position of spiritual knowledge and perception and activity. That's what it means, Veda. Veda means knowledge, but it's not mundane knowledge, it's spiritual knowledge that liberates you from the cycle of birth and death. There's all different types of knowledge, but the Vedic knowledge is specifically spiritual knowledge that will liberate you from the cycle of birth and death. That's the way you can explain that.
Got it. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Haribol. Okay, my dear devotees, it is 7:30, so I'm going to stop the lecture now and go to the temple and have even more fun. Unless there are any other questions or comments. Okay, thank you very much, my dear devotees. I'm going on my merry way to the temple. There's got to be some